Hello friends, my name is Sive and this is Stories in Sive, and today's video is going to be a wrap-up. I'm going to go through all of the books that I read during the month of June. For those of you who don't know, I participated in Whateverthon last month, and that is a readathon that was hosted for the second year in a row by Maddie over at Book Browsing Blog, and it was so much fun. I had such a good time and got to a lot of great books, some doozies, but mostly good. This reading month was an interesting one for me. Because you participate in a readathon, there are specific prompts that you have to hit in order to move forward or collect points or whatever for your team. There is a competitive aspect of the readathon, especially Whateverthon. I ended up picking up a lot of books that weren't already on my physical TBR, and I did not do a good job this past month of reducing my physical TBR. I did a lot of audiobook loans, library loans, and I'm excited to go through those with you today because there were some great ones, and I am glad that I got to a lot of these books. However, I didn't reduce my physical TBR like at all. So firstly, we can start with The Paris Apartment by Miss Lucy Foley, which is a very hyped and anticipated release for 2022. This author is a very well-known thriller and mystery author, and this is actually my first pickup by her. I've never read The Hunting Party or The Guest List by her, and The Paris Apartment was mediocre. We follow a main character whose brother is living in Paris, and they're attempting to reconnect and have had a few phone calls in the past couple of weeks, and she basically is kind of at her stage in life where nothing is going right for her. Her job isn't working out, her relationships aren't working out, and she's like, frick it, I've got no money. I'm just gonna spend the rest of my savings getting to Paris to stay with my brother in this super amazing apartment that he just had a connection and got in with. So she goes to stay with him, and whenever she gets there, he's not there. And essentially you are in a very close-quartered apartment complex that is owned and run by and inhabited by this small group of people, and you kind of start to get to know the people, and obviously something suspicious is going on. Now, the reason why I say this book is mediocre because I read a lot of thrillers, I read a lot of horror. I prefer the outlandish and the speculative, and so if you want a relatively tame mystery with a relatively tame, it's big trigger warnings, look them up. I'm just saying for my taste, it wasn't really that crazy. The twists at the end were very good, but nothing super memorable, nothing super notable. Don't remember the name of the main characters, it's already out of my brain. I gave this a solid 3-star, and for those who have read Lucy Foley before, I'd love to know your opinions. Should I give her a try? Or what, was the guest list really that good? The next book I read was Clockwork Angel by Miss Cassandra Clare, and this is the first book off of my physical TBR and the only book that I read off of my physical TBR this month. This is a YA fantasy novel, very well known. I needed something that was a little bit light and very easy to read, not a super complicated magic system, not a super complicated plot or politics, and this delivered. It was great, a good introduction to the series. I very much enjoyed the characters. It's witty, it's got banter, and I liked it. I gave it 3 stars, which is not uncommon for me. Actually, what I've noticed a pattern in my reading is whenever I get into a series, typically the first book gets a 3-star and it goes up from there. We follow our main character Tessa, who moves from New York after the death of her aunt to England, where her brother is, to basically just see him out and try and recuperate her life after their aunt's passing. Upon arrival, she is immediately kidnapped by these people and basically trained in a magic that she didn't know that she has. And because of those people, a whole world is opened up to her, which is a hidden magic system within London. The shadow hunters live in an institute and are balancing a very delicate relationship between downworlders and Nephilim. Nephilim are the shadow hunters, downworlders include warlocks, vampires, werewolves, and maybe something else fairies or goblins or something like that. There's pretty much every folklorish creature is a downworlder, and then the mundanes are humans. There's a very precarious balancing act that is happening right now, and because this mundane, Tessa was a mundane, but she actually has powers. Because she was kidnapped, the Nephilim had to step in. So she meets this group of shadow hunters, and it's found family, but it's also fantasy and magic, and there's a mystery plot as well. It was good, it was great. I'm really enjoying it. I'm continuing with the series. The next book I finished was You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hochul. This is the first Kindle book I've read in a long time, but it's a romance, it's a contemporary romance story, and it's my first lovers to enemies to lovers romance that I've ever read, which is super fun. So essentially there is these two characters who are engaged and they fell in love and it was super great. But upon their engagement and they moved in together, they have just not been getting along, and they really kind of have started to despise each other and not communicate and not take the other's opinion or feelings into accountability at all. And so they begin to very much foster this resentment and hate. Now we're the enemies part, right? Okay, cool. But they're still engaged and a lot of money is being poured into their wedding right now. They are trying to like prank each other into backing out of the wedding, because whoever backs out of the wedding has to pay for it. So much fun, so cute, exactly what I needed at the time. I flew through this within like 2 days. It was a grand old time. The reason why this didn't get a 5-star is it just didn't evoke that like 5-star level of emotion in me. I still very much enjoyed it though, and if you like contemporary romances, try it out. The next book I read was Golden Sun by Pierce Brown, which is the second book in the Red Rising trilogy. It is a sci-fi trilogy and it follows basically a society that is divided up like socioeconomically by colors, and so they go through all the colors of the rainbow, but reds are the main character. He's born a red. However, in the first book, he finds out that the upper society have basically been keeping big secrets about how far the society's actually developed in order to keep the Reds in this very low servant, like basically slave role. Because of that, there is a big rebellion and he basically is being formed into a spy position, and he has to go up into the upper levels, which is the golds, where are the highest levels, and train to become a gold to basically gain political power to stir civil war. All that happened in the first book. I can't go into too much of what the second book is about without giving spoilers for the first one, but I had a great time and I ended up giving this 4 stars. Great example, I gave Red Rising, the first book in that series, 3 stars. This one is 4, and I'm hoping that Morningstar will be 5. My critique for this one is definitely the level of complicated and intricate plots that are hard to follow. There are many, many characters. There's a lot of moving parts. This is deeply political, like so political. You have to keep track of everyone's motivations basically and who's trying to topple what leader and for what reason. However, the ending of this was just epic proportions. I thought it could be the end of the series, but I feel like it's not really that much of a spoiler to say, but it didn't end well for our main characters, and I'm scared for Morningstar. Moving right along, the next book I read was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado, and this is a nonfiction memoir book, and this follows our narrator, Carmen Maria Machado's, time in an abusive relationship. She uses this conceptual dream house to walk the reader through the different rooms, and as rooms are falling and things are being built and things are being destroyed, she talks you through what stage in her life that is applicable to. I read this during the 24-hour readathon that was happening during the month, and I have a video for it if you have yet to see it. You can check it out in the description below, but this book was really neat. Very, very different from what I normally read. This actually fulfilled a prompt called less read genre. I don't read nonfiction very often, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Okay, you're totally whited out, but this is written in an essay style basically, and because it has such easy to digest parts, it read very quickly. This is also not a super long book. It is less than 250 pages. I don't normally rate memoirs because it's really not for my entertainment. Sometimes people are telling a story for the sake of telling a story, and there's not really room or space that you're asked to critique or say the writing isn't good enough or the story wasn't interesting enough. That's not the intent of this book. That's not what you're supposed to get out of it. However, this was really enjoyable, an incredibly creative way of storytelling, and I'd recommend it if you are interested. Again, this is about an abusive relationship, so do look up your trigger warnings. Next was an audiobook pickup from the library called Assembly by Natasha Brown, and this is a short novella about a young Black woman, and she lives in London, and a lot of the story is actually infiltrated in London society and the government's relationship to society, and there was some of that contemporary lit fic style writing. This is fiction, and our unnamed narrator is navigating her space as a Black woman in predominantly white communities. Her boyfriend is white, and she tells a story about going to a garden party at his super rich parents' house. And she talks about her inner monologue and her exterior dialogue with him about his privilege and how he will never struggle for money. He'll never struggle for the support if something ever goes wrong. So yeah, there's commentary in this book on class and wealth and race. And without going too far into the plot of the novella, she has also just received some pretty heartbreaking news, and she's trying to process through that. So this book was okay for me. I recognize that there's a lot of very important conversations that need to happen, and I feel like this book could be very useful for a lot of people. However, I really just couldn't get past the style of writing, and that's a very personal thing, but it was just very disjointed and very objective and statement of fact. There was some description, I guess you could say, but I think just the writing style made me feel very disconnected from the story, and I ended up giving it 2 stars. I would also like to say one of the reasons why I might not have felt as connected to the story is because it's a novella. I've only read a handful of novellas in my life, and I'm not totally sure how conducive my reading is to novellas. I'm still trying to discover that for myself. The next book I read was The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, and this is a historical fiction novel paired with one timeline that is a more modern timeline, and I've read a couple of these so far, and I'm not sure they're for me. We follow our main character who, after 10 years of marriage to her spouse, has just learned that he cheated on her, and she leaves for their 10-year anniversary trip they're supposed to take together alone. She arrives in London with a lot on her mind and essentially goes on this random, what are those called? Excursion. So she goes on this excursion, which is called mudlarking, and they are basically wading in mud at I don't know, is it the River Thames or something like that? It's at the edge of the River Thames. Yeah, okay. So she discovers an aged apothecary vial at the River Thames. As she is newly grappling with the searing betrayal of her husband's infidelity, a curious research project is exactly the distraction Caroline needs. But when she discovers a link between the vial and London's long unsolved apothecary murders, Caroline's upended present soon collides with an explosive history, binding her fate to Nella and Eliza. So Nella is an apothecary, and she does normal things, but also on the side, she creates poisons and sells them to women in need to harm the men in their lives who are abusing them. Let me tell you why this didn't work for me, because when Nella would do something, the audience would ingest that thing, that development in the plot, action or reaction. Then Caroline would go about her cute little life researching, and then she'd be like, oh my gosh, Nella did this thing. She didn't know it was Nella, but she's like, the apothecarist did this thing. And I'm like, yeah, I already knew that. We were already told that. I think my expectations were off. I read a lot of fantasy and sci-fi, and I also read a lot of thrillers and horror. So I was expecting from this book, though why would I, because it's historical fiction, I was like, wow, these murders are about to get gruesome. It's gonna be interesting, and something's gonna happen with my thriller horror angle. Or I thought, wow, there's gonna be some sort of magic or some sort of potion or witch or whatever that's gonna happen that furthers the plot and makes Nella's story really interesting to me. Neither of those things happened. It really is truly straightforward, a historical fiction, and it's a research project in historical fiction context. For some of you, that might work really well, and you should pick this up if you're interested in it. For me, it didn't. I gave it 2 stars. The next book I read was my second romance contemporary novel, and that is You Had Me at Hola by Alexis Daria. And wow, this is a story about 2 co-stars who are shooting a television show together, and they end up falling for each other, but it's extremely messy, as you can imagine. Falling in love with someone that you work with, let alone you are playing his love interest. Not only are they falling for each other, but in the TV show, they are already together. It was complicated, it was juicy, and it was really, really fun and flirty. But what set this book apart for me was our main character. Jasmine Lynn Rodriguez is an awesome main character. She is extremely smart, very self-aware, very career-driven. She knows what she wants, but she does have a penchant for letting boys kind of like distract her from what she's trying to do. And at the beginning of this story, she is just getting out of a really bad, really public breakup. So she's a, I can't remember if he's the telenovela or she's the soap opera or vice versa, but she's already been in the limelight. She's already kind of low-key famous. And so she has a very public breakup with like a musician or something like that, and then immediately swears off boys at the start of this book and was like, I'm not dating anyone, I can't get into relationships, I can't get into situationships, like it's just not for me right now. I'm really trying to get this TV show off the ground and like take my career to the next level. So that was just such a cool context, and I really enjoyed the setup and I really enjoyed the execution of this book. I just thought it was so good. I gave it 4 stars. Again, it didn't have like the Talia Hibbert level of like ooey gooiness that made me like screaming at the book. Also, just side note, another thing I'm learning is I love it when a super disciplined and scheduled, routined character falls for someone who's very spontaneous and doesn't always like know what they're doing, and that was featured in this book. I'm extremely scheduled. I wouldn't always say disciplined, but I definitely thrive off of having a routine and knowing what we're doing. I don't love last minute plans, and I just empathized a lot with Ashton, which is the love interest, because he's very like that, and Jasmine is very like fly by the seat of her pants. So it was super fun. It was a good time. Okay, folks, we are nearing the end here. The second to last book that I read was My Summer Darlings by Miss May Cobb, who is like, to me, the 2 books that I've read by her, like the queen of melodramatic female-female friendships. This is a thriller novel about a mother who moves back into her hometown, and all of her like 40-year-old friends now who she was friends with in high school basically just like put their arms around her and are like, yep, you're with us. These women are rich, these women are dramatic, and these women have too much time on their hands. Which is just like the perfect concoction for like a dramatic mom thriller, and I love that crap. I eat that up any day of the week. And the last book that I picked up was A Lot Like Adios by Alexis Daria, which is of course a romance, and it is the companion novel to You Had Me at Hola, and then there's a 3rd one coming out. So this one is a second chance romance, and we follow Michelle and Gabe, who knew each other growing up, were childhood friends, and kind of had this thing, and then Gabe left. Now they're reconnecting because Gabe found out that his business partner reached out to Michelle for a marketing package for their gym, and Gabe then types up an email and sends it to Michelle and was like, hey, just so you know, if you accept this, I work with this guy, you'll likely see me, so like if you don't want to, I totally get it. And she was like, no, if you want to put a gym in New York, which is the reason why that guy had reached out to her, and you want me to work on the marketing package, I need you to come here so that I can like interview about your gym and what you want it to be about, basically. Through some very interesting events, she tells him that she won't do it unless he like stays with her in New York. Like, imagine if your like childhood high school crush, like ruined you crush, and you were like, I want to like live in proximity with you. Like, what? Anyways, I didn't like this book as much. I still really enjoyed myself. It was very fun. I very much liked Gabe as a character. Not really, actually. I didn't like love them. If I'm thinking about it, like, did I even really like this book that much? No, I had a good time. I loved it. It was so fun. However, I wrote 2 things on Goodreads that I'm going to read for you because I feel like it just like gives you my exasperated feelings. Maybe will give you the reasoning why I'm not like as into this book. 2 things to expand on regarding my personal preference. 1, I'm not sure how much I like second chance romances. There's just so much complicated history between Gabe and Michelle. Michelle knows she's going to get hurt again, and when she gets hurt again, she's like, well, I can't complain or let anyone in on my heartbreak because I knew this would happen and I let it happen, it's on me. And yeah, that's true, I guess, but let your friends in. I enjoy the exploration of friendship and relationship nuances, but seeing both characters make the exact same decision as if 9 years hadn't passed made me wish there was more growth. And secondly, too much spice. Because Gabe and Michelle were friends growing up, they have a lot of memories and history together. When they were teenagers, there was some tension between them, and so when they reconnected, they basically immediately got it on. this is a dual perspective, and you hear from both characters being like, that wasn't a good idea. Why did we do that? But then they kept doing it the whole freaking book. And look, I don't hate on spicy scenes. Some is fine. But it was so frustrating to know that they knew it was gonna end in disaster and they went ahead with it anyways. And also, just in general, there was a little bit too much for me. So yeah, I ended up giving that book 3 stars. I enjoyed it. It was great. But like, it was a little bit more frustrating than I like my romances to be. And that's it. Those are all of the books that I read in June. Thank you for joining me. I would love to know, what is your favorite book that you read this past month? As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoy other bookish content like this, feel free to subscribe. I would love to have you. And other than that, have a great rest of your day. I will see you in the next video. Bye.